Good morning. My name is Reverend Arnold Isidore Thomas, and I'm been privileged to moderate this session on Raise Up Justice. I'm sure you can hear me. Okay. We're here to discuss how we, as Vermonters, can respond to what our federal government has done in pretty much abdicating its responsibility in areas of human rights. They have pretty much gutted everything related to human rights, the Department of Justice, housing, education. And so the states are left with the responsibility of trying to respond and pick up the pieces of where they left off. It's interesting because back in the 50s and 60s, when Southern states especially were concerned about preserving states' rights against Black and brown people, civil rights leaders had to turn to the federal government and the Supreme Court for protection. That protection is no longer there. And so now states are taking on the responsibility of trying to protect its citizens where the government has failed. So we're going to discuss how do we do that. And I am privileged to introduce our panelists who will help us address this matter. First of all, I must introduce the person who is going to be doing much of the talking, I hope. Reverend Mark Hughes, who is Executive Director of the Vermont Racial Justice Alliance. Mark, could you stand up? And I'd also like to introduce members of the panel. And I will do that in alphabetical order, first with Robert Appel. Robert is a Vermont litigator who recently retired after 30 plus years in state government. He served as the executive director and legal counsel of the Vermont Human Rights Commission from 2001 to 2013, Defender General from 1993 to 2001, Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights from 1988 to 1993, and Public Defender from 1986 to 1988. He was also employed as an investigator, first by the Office of the Defender General and then by the Office of the Attorney General. Robert, it's good to have you here. Rachel Battison is an experienced civil rights attorney for Vermont Legal Aid in areas of housing discrimination. She acknowledges that there is significant housing discrimination in Vermont based on race, color, national origin, religion, and ethnicity. And for over 16 years, she has overseen Vermont legal aid housing discrimination work, including fair housing testing and investigation. Rachel, welcome. And Big Hartman, Executive Director of the Human Rights Commission and state agency, which is a state agency tasked with enforcing Vermont's anti-discrimination laws. Big graduated magna cum laude from Vermont Law School, and since graduation has worked in Vermont in areas of labor and employment law in private practice, and as in-house counsel for the Vermont State Employees Association. They started at the Vermont Human Rights Commission as a staff attorney investigator in 2021 and became the executive director of and general counsel in 2023. Big, also congratulations, because you were the 2024 recipient of the Social Justice Scholar Alumni Award from the Vermont Law School. Big, it's so good to have you here. So, Mark, you have some slides you want to show related to the questions of what happened to democracy and civil rights infrastructure dismantled.
Somebody give it up for Arnold. So we're gonna take a quick ride, and for those of you who are interested, I'm gonna provide the slides later. So if you feel like I'm speed driving, just understand that this is the main thrust of this is we just want to get to the Raise Up Justice campaign, and we want to get through that, and then we want to ask some questions to the panel surrounding that, and then also don't forget that this evening at 6:15 p.m. will be, I think, here. Watching the second episode of Amend, which is actually hosted by Will Smith, and it's about the 14th Amendment and specifically the Equal Protection Clause. And we'll talk about our Equal Protection Constitutional Amendment, which is also halfway done as well. Okay, fair enough? Just go like this. If you want to, you can eat, yeah. So I'm going to bring my food here. So our democracy has been lost, as Arnold was saying, and what we see is that although this administration did, I guess. It sought election through political, I should say, economic policy. It's governing through racist policy. So that's what's going on right now. It looks like there's just this huge erasure that's happening on any progress that has been made towards addressing rather systemic racism and other forms of oppression, and also they're enforcing severe legal and financial punishment on folks who are trying to pursue it. So that's the landscape. I think most people already know that. But I think it's worth saying this is a really very, very difficult time. Policies and programs that were created to transform institutions and organizations, civil rights, and even initiatives that intend to train and educate individuals on the legacy of slavery and other forms of systemic oppression. All of this is under attack right now. These are the things they don't want us to say. But what we've come to understand as we look, as Arnold had just indicated, with our democracy being transformed to an autocracy, I just want you to sit with that for a minute. That what we're coming to understand more and more is that racial injustice is antithetical to democracy. So we got to solve this. This may seem like a conference on civil rights, and it may very well be. But I think the path that has taken us to their loss has been all racial. So as long as racial injustices persist, democracy is going to remain in jeopardy. So we're going to have to get this figured out, folks, at some point or another. We're going to need to get this figured out, because is there anybody in here who failed algebra? I did. I had to retake it. And we're going to keep taking this test over and over again until we get this thing on race right as a nation. Dismantling civil rights protections, the rollback of racial justice programs, the suppression of the truth about slavery's legacy, they've all weakened our national stability, and they've completely compromised the rule of law. You take a look at this, and you also think about the drawback of the protective orders, executive orders that were in place. How many people realize that a Lyndon Baines Johnson executive order from 1965 was withdrawn? Many people realize that. You know what it did? It provided protection of folks who work for the federal government from discrimination. It's 1965. So I came to welcome you to the autocracy. I could go on. Things could get dimmer, and it could get more glib, but I'm not gonna clobber you with all of the details. The truth is that our hair is on fire. and this is an emergency. The Department of Justice, the crown jewel of civil rights, which was established in 1957, has been compromised. Civil rights have fallen nationally. Right now, we're waiting for a response. So we got to do something. So far, I've prepared a list of what we've done so far. So I want to talk a little bit about Raise Up Justice. This is a multiracial, gender neutral, intergenerational, interfaith, if I can say all these words, multi-able, politically non-affiliated, moral fusion civil rights movement, focusing on truth and justice and centering the legacy of slavery. We're grounded in the golden rule. This is focused on civil rights and oriented towards human rights. And this is based on nonviolence and directed towards the beloved community. This is a statewide, ongoing civil rights movement. So I just wanted to make you aware of it today. And there'll be more information, and there'll be some, get your phones ready. There'll be some QR codes that you can scan right now, some of you, to be able to get your head around some of the details surrounding it. This is analysis work. Our data folks did an analysis of, Robert, I think it's about 159 executive orders. And part of that analysis was also which orders were currently under litigation, 196 rather. That slide deck is available for download. It's on our website. You can go and take a look at it. You're probably wondering as attorneys, yeah, but some of them are in litigation. How many of 196 do you think are in litigation? Raise your hand. Somebody shout it out. 160 are in litigation. Any other ideas? How many are in litigation? 191 30. 30. So it's just something to think about. I'm not trying to discourage you, but I want you to be mindful that even though cognitive dissonance does work in some ways, this is not the time we want to use it. 30. So go out and get that report. I can give you all of the nuts and bolts, and for folks who know Pat Attilia, who does all of the work for the race traffic stop data, he's our primary on that. Okay. So here's the analysis. Criminalizing DEI. What happened here is they're using civil rights enforcement to criminalize DEI, and they're also attacking social safety nets. They're also reestablishing traditional hierarchies of race and gender. That's the strategy. That's what's going on right now. Yes, it's a race war. It is definitely, they're coming at us from that angle, and that's why our defense, our response has to be likewise. This is the central issue. The backlash is to anything that exposes or addresses systemic racism, if you really want to think about it, and how we've comported the language that we use surrounding DEI, was really, if you think about it, it's addressing the legacy of slavery. That is to say, the systemic racism, which means disparate outcomes. So I think the most important thing that I can tell you today is that just keep in mind that this wedge is being used, and they're relying on our fear and also relying on our grief to continue to use this wedge. Here's what we know. This is our analysis. Is only achieve it's justice, stability, and safety for all Americans. This is the takeaway. This is the lesson that we've got to learn this time. It's only achievable by acknowledging and addressing systemic racism. So yeah, we got some stories to tell. We've got some messaging to do in our communities. Here's some objectives for you. And I told you I'm going to give you the slide deck, so don't freak out because I'm flying through this deck. Community resilience is one. Another one is education on the legacy of slavery. These are the objectives, if you will, of the campaign itself. The third one is anti-racism and anti-oppression programs. That's in state and municipalities, as well as civil rights and racial justice and disparate impact policies, and then finally, it looks like it's falling off the slide for me here, enhancing effective oversight of law enforcement. And I know that's going to be a little bit unnerving when you think about law enforcement, but law enforcement enforce civil rights on a federal level and also on a statewide level. I mean, there is civil law, obviously, but there's also criminal law. But the apparatus that enforces everything is, when you think of DOJ, for example, there are 5 law enforcement agencies under DOJ that do that work. Now we call them the Homeland Security Task Force. And yes, they are here in your state. Here's a few principles. We've got a vision on society built on love and justice, equality, where individuals are treated with respect and dignity, free from poverty and hunger and hate. We love and care for one another. These are, again, the principles of this campaign. We steadfastly refuse to use violence or threat of violence as a means to achieve what we're seeking. We believe that civil rights are fundamental to the democratic integrity and societal well-being. And there's little more important in the fight for the soul of this nation than the fight for our civil rights and the fight for justice. We will fight for civil rights because they have never, nor will they ever be, won without a fight. We will fight for transformation, the systems to continue to produce a racially disparate and the systems that produce these outcomes, and we'll work to ensure acknowledgement of harm caused by policy violence and show up in community to address the impact. So those are the 7. We just kept it at a neat 7. We could have kept going on and on. What we know is that as Arnold just alluded to is the shoe's on the other foot. Now, instead of the federal government protecting us at the state level, now the state has to protect us because the federal government won't. Now, that's notwithstanding the fact that there's many things that we too must take responsibility for in our own communities. So we're not just looking for the state to do stuff, because when you're thinking about, what are we doing in our communities, this is very, very important. I don't want to miss that. And so don't get stuck on what I'm getting ready to show you, because there's a whole lot of other work to do. But now what we're going to talk about for a minute is the state itself. And we're going to talk about powers. So we know that the governor has powers. We know that there are also legislative powers that exist in the state of Vermont. We know that the legislature can call themselves back in session right now. We know that the governor has a constitutional authority to do so. We also know that there are certain things that could be done if there was a political will, or if there was the intestinal fortitude to do so. And when we get to municipalities, the same thing is true. Same thing is true because there's executive and legislative powers on municipality levels. So these are just some of the things that we know about our elected officials. We elected them, they work for us. So this campaign, some of the demands is we're asking for the governor to declare an emergency because, remember, our hair is on fire. We're also asking for the governor to call the legislature back in session because we have legislative work to do. And we're also asking for the governor to issue some executive orders. Here's the executive orders that we're asking the governor to issue. One has to do with what we know to be one of those executive orders that I mentioned earlier. This is called 14288. You might want to write that one down, 14288. And that's the one that is an executive mandate that military equipment be moved into all 18,000 law enforcement agencies across the United States. It's also calling for the Homeland Security Task Force to execute these. It also provides, quote, indemnification and legal protection to all law enforcement agencies. And the list goes on, and it holds elected officials that obstruct justice accountable, and it calls the Attorney General to enforce that. So how about if we get some transparency and accountability into the use of Homeland Security Task Forces, as well as maybe what we should be looking at for the governor to do is, oh, by the way, we're still talking about race and racism, and because we did fail algebra. So let's go back and get it right. So there is, let's institute a whole of government programmatic approach in that work. Legislative demands are similar. We're asking for the legislature just act with it with the sense of urgency and the spirit of your joint resolution when you said that racism was a public health emergency in 2021. So there is a with Act 188, R188 in 2025, the legislature does have the re-adjournment authority to bring themselves back in session, because clearly there's some work to get done here, because this is a different climate. So therefore we must be in a different posture. And finally, on the legislative demands, what we're talking about is generally speaking, that we've got some draft policies, civil rights over enhancement, funding, enforcement. There needs to be a firewall between funding and enforcement at the statewide level from the federal government. The impact laws, the oversight of law enforcement again, and maybe even some state consent decrees, because all the federal ones have been withdrawn and they will not enforce any consent decrees federally. So I got a list of policies, all of these, because they're parenthetical. You see the parentheses around the numbers. That means they're on the wall right now. The only thing is the legislature can't act upon them because they're not in session. So what we've been content to do is just to wait, I don't know why, until January to get back in session to do this work. So these are some of the legislative demands. They're not exhaustive and they're not even necessarily specific. These are just examples, much of which is our what we call justice agenda, the Vermont Racial Justice Alliance's justice agenda. There are many other policies. Oh, by the way, the constitutional amendment, the Equal Protection Constitutional Amendment, is also on the wall. And we can also call for mayor's demands as well, which I'm not going to get into in the interest of time. And you can go back and take a look at this. This is how you sign on to Raise Up Justice. If you have your phone, you can take a look at, you can go ahead and capture that. And what we'll do this evening is after amend, we'll also have some more conversations about the Equal Protection Clause, and we'll talk more about Raise Up Justice for those who have questions. And right now we're going to turn to the panel, have some conversations with them. And Arnold, thank you for the time.
Thank you, Mark. So I'm going to ask the panelists to, there are 4 seats up here, and I think there's a mic with each seat. So if you can just keep talking. So if you can just take your seats, and I'll try and direct questions to each of you, and then we're going to open up opportunity for you, the members of the audience, to raise questions. So Big, I think I'm going to raise this first question. Are the mics on?
Are the mics on? Yes.
I'm going to give you the first question, and it's not, I'm not asking these in the order that they may be presented on this sheet, but here goes. The withdrawal of enforcement of civil rights, the institution of the so-called new civil right happens through federal law enforcement agencies now deployed in Homeland Security Task Force. Any autonomous state civil rights apparatus must be a firewall against such devices. Community members and elected officials are conditioned on an old, failed, tough on crime mentality that blinds them from the necessity of acting to ensure that this firewall exists. My question to you, Big, is what can we do beyond, let's say, fair and impartial policing, which is also, I guess, in jeopardy right now? What can we do beyond fair and impartial policing to overcome these lethal obstacles that the government, federal government, has imposed upon us?
Okay, just a small question. Okay, is this mic working? I'm loud anyway, but I want to make sure folks who are remote can hear me. I think it might be helpful for me to lay out for you a little bit of the federal state interaction that we deal with at the Human Rights Commission. We see, so we have three main areas of jurisdiction where we're enforcing anti-discrimination protections, okay? One is employment. So that's a very common area of anti-discrimination enforcement, and, you know, folks can file lawsuits when they feel that their employer has discriminated against them. So those are either handled in Vermont at the state level by the agency or by the Attorney General's Office Civil Rights Unit, okay? That's for any private employer. If your employer is the state of Vermont, capital S, state of Vermont, you can file your employment discrimination complaint with our office at the Human Rights Commission. We have generally had a very positive relationship with the federal counterpart who enforces our federal employment discrimination statutes, and that's the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Sounds familiar, right? So we have working relationships with that office historically where we agree to do the state level investigations and enforcement for most of the employment cases that fall under both federal and state law. And then the federal government gives us money, gives all the states money to do those investigations. We have a similar relationship with housing, and housing is the second area of jurisdiction that we do anti-discrimination work in. And in that instance, it's a very similar dynamic, and we're dealing with the with HUD, the Department of Housing and Urban Development. And similarly, we dual file cases under both federal and state law, and HUD is supposed to be paying us to do the enforcement work in those cases. Our third area of jurisdiction is public accommodations. That is our state version of the Americans with Disabilities Act, and it also prohibits discrimination on other legally protected categories like race. This is where we just added some citizenship and immigration status, religion, all the other legally protected categories under state law. So there we often will look to the Department of Justice to help with enforcement of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And we will also be working with the Office of Civil Rights within the Department of Education. That's an agency that has been really wiped out in the last year under the current administration. And what it means is that all of the work of enforcing our anti-discrimination protections for schools, for students being protected from discrimination, all of that work is falling on the state agencies like ours, where we used to have like it would be very helpful for our investigation and for our enforcement work to have a federal agency that's also involved and helping put some pressure on those schools to change their practices and their policies. And with HUD, we are seeing a real decimation of the fair housing programs. They were recently all completely laid off. All of the HUD employees, essentially, who were doing fair housing work were laid off during the shutdown. We've been told that they're coming back, but we know that there is a concerted effort to basically obliterate the state support for fair housing enforcement. So how we're taking that is we're going to have to do that ourselves. Fine, we'll do it. We're not afraid. We're not going to slow down what's happening at the state level. And we're seeing the exact same sentiment from all the other agencies across the country who are working at state and local government levels to enforce fair housing protections. Many are much more reliant on HUD dollars than our office is. So they're struggling. They're going to be scrambling to see how they can get funds, because we are seeing that HUD, it feels very unlikely that we're going to get paid what we're due right now. We do like a year of fair housing enforcement, and then we get paid at the end of that year. We have not been paid yet, and we are supposed to have received our money by now. And we expect that, similar to what EEOC is doing, when HUD does offer to finally pay us the money that we've earned for investigating and closing fair housing cases, that they are going to attach a lot of strings to that receipt of dollars, like you promise you won't, you promise you'll comply with the executive order pertaining to gender ideology. As a non-binary person, I'm not going to be able to do that, nor do I think it complies with state anti-discrimination protections to sign on to that executive order. They also, we expect they will require that we don't do any DEI trainings if we want to receive HUD dollars. We also expect that they will require that we don't do any disparate impact findings of any kind. That's not just like, if you're using HUD dollars, you can't do these things. It's like your entire office can't do any of these things. So we don't see a likelihood that we can sign on to these strings attached to receive that money this year. And we know that they have a plan to remove certification for agencies like ours for next year. That's what's going to happen. So all it's telling us is that we cannot rely on receiving financial support or enforcement support from these federal agencies anymore. And what that means is that we need to amp up our state law activities. It's wise to not rely on the federal government because those administrations change and their policies change. Let's just make sure that we're doing everything we can at the state level to support the enforcement work, which is two-pronged. It's not just about investigations and litigation. It's also about prevention. And that means proactive education and training for the people who are likely to violate these laws and the people who are protected by them. There's still a lot of lack of information that we've needed, and we've often relied on federal dollars to help pay for that outreach and education work, and that is not wise to be doing in the future. I'm not sure that I totally answered your question, but I just really wanted to go off a little bit with you about how the feds, how that relationship between the federal and the state government is changing now. But I really want to send home the message too that I'm talking with my counterparts around the country who are in similar positions. We are strategizing together. We are trying to figure out everything we do, everything we can possibly do to not slow down the enforcement and crucial discrimination prevention work that's needed just because we've got a federal government that's pulling back on prioritizing that.
Thank you so much, Vic.
Thank you.
Thank you. Rachel, I imagine your work in housing discrimination, addressing housing discrimination, cooperates a lot with what BIG is doing. How has these federal mandates affected your work?
So like the Human Rights Commission, we are very dependent at Legal Aid on funding from the federal government to fund the work that we do, both in litigation and in education and outreach. We recently went through a whole year of no funding at all. We're currently still in that, actually. And like the Human Rights Commission, we did recently receive word that we did get awarded, surprisingly, a new round of funding, but we haven't signed that contract yet. And I don't know yet what kinds of restrictions will be on that funding, but I expect that they will be as BIG described. So a lot of, I guess one thing I want to say is that the law is still good to the extent that courts interpret it the way they have previously, which is an open question. So that's the good news. The problem is enforcement. If there's no money to pay for lawyers to enforce the Fair Housing Act and the Vermont Fair Housing and Public Accommodations Act, it doesn't matter if you have a law. It's not self-effectuating. So you need people that are paid to actually do that work. And as the feds withdraw their money, put restrictions on it, and maybe they couldn't this year, but as soon as possible, if things continue, they will just gut that funding.
Thank you, Rachel. Robert, Raise Up Justice asserts that true justice, stability, and safety for all Americans is only achievable by acknowledging and addressing systemic racism, the legacy of slavery. We're going to have to move the needle on addressing systemic racism, despite the federal government's attack on all who do so. If there is any hope for us to restore and sustain civil rights, how do you see this state, especially in your experience as a litigator in areas of human rights? How do you see this state navigating that challenge?
Thank you. Before I launch on that question, I want to thank you all for being here. This is an important conversation. I want to thank the commissioners, one of whom is with us, Bruce Wilson, the staff of the Human Rights Commission, particularly to my left, it's big, and this was quite a job to pull this together. So thank you all. Well, you thought your question was tough.
Yeah.
I have to say, I've been admitted, I gained admission to the bar in 1984 after reading law. I was an investigator in public defense and in the AG Civil Rights Division. And I was ready to give up my license. And then January 20th happened. And I said, I can't do that. Neither Rachel nor Big really spoke much about the private bar needs to step up. And I don't know how many lawyers are in here, but I think it's very difficult to demand adequate funding. I mean, you can demand all you want, but receiving adequate funding to have a vigorous enforcement presence, which to me includes active litigation, is critical to holding people to account. And in my time in these various positions, I've not really seen that. And I'm glad to hear Big tells me there's now 9 staff members at the Human Rights Commission. I was there, we were 4. I left in 2012. So that's progress.
And we're able to do more litigation than ever since we have acquired a full-time position. So we have 15 cases that we're enforcing right now in court, and we're always contemplating the next complaint.
Which is great.
It's progress. I think it is moving the
Definitely
needle.
progress. So, because without that bottom line accountability, it's easy for people who don't give a damn to blow us off. So, and on my signature block, I mean, it's dated, but I have a quote from Dr. King that says, and I'll rephrase it: a person's back can only be ridden if it's bent. And to me, that means we have to stand up for what we believe in. We have to take risks. Many of us who are middle-class white folks, we have privileges that our brethren of color don't. And, you know, we can certainly be more aggressive in standing up when we see things go awry. You know, I was involved in the early stages of fair and impartial policing. I've described that as trying to turn a battleship around. I mean, the ingrained culture of policing arose out of slave catching. So to get people to reflect on their behaviors and how it impacts communities of color, and now particularly brown-skinned individuals who speak their first language is Spanish, and all of a sudden, and our Supreme Court has said, go ahead and racially profile. That would have never happened back in the day. I'm shocked over and over again as I read decisions of the Supreme Court and read about their processing. To me, there's the 3 most powerful people in the country are Chief Justice Roberts, Justice Gorsuch, and Justice Barrett. And each of them, at least once, has done something decent. But the other two wings of the court are so far apart. And I'm very disappointed in the court for not pushing back against the administration's outrageous positions over and over and over again. So I agree that a lot of this is going to devolve to states, and we have a proud history. It's not without fault, for damn sure, but we do have a proud history, and I think we need to push forward on that history. So I will say this about Trump. Trump one was bad in terms of unleashing and making hate okay, but now it's on steroids. The notion of we're paying people to drive around in unmarked vehicles and with masks on and grab people up for exercising their constitutional rights. It's like dystopia. I have to reference our luncheon speaker, Moshe Madawi, who's one of those. He shows up for a check-in at the ICE office and he disappears. Same was with Mirs Ozturk, the tough students. And I tip my hat to our federal bench in this district who did the right thing on those cases. And if we don't have the right to free expression, we ain't got diddly. And the attacks on the press, the attacks on academic freedom, the coercion of trying to strip progress, DEI, can't say affirmative action anymore. I mean, it's frightening to me. It's very frightening. And what we have now is the administration promotes white Christian nationalism, by and large. Project 2025, never heard of it. Russ Voigt, he's running the show. It's like, anyway, I think I'll stop there. One thing I will say, and I was very disappointed in our governor on this question, was voluntarily giving up personal identification on recipients of SNAP. Make them pry it out of you. There's no reason to voluntarily comply with outrageous and arguably unlawful orders that come down from DC. So I'll stop there. Want to leave some time for interaction. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Robert. And I want to ask this final question before I open it up to the audience. And that is, what sort of pressure would you advise in, again, moving this needle along where we can encourage, move the governor, our state legislators, our state Senate, and really declaring an emergency. Several years ago, the State House passed a bill saying that racism is a public disease, something to that effect. Health emergencies, right?
As did the city of Burlington.
Right, and the city of Burlington. And all the apparatus within the state government will try to address that. I think that we are in this crisis moment, and the state on all levels needs to, especially the state house on all levels, needs to respond to this. How can we push the governor and the state legislator in doing that?
Let me recognize a member of the House who's sitting in the back, Tom Stevens, who's chair of an important committee that has done much work in acknowledging that, in fact, indigenous folks lived here before us white folks took it over. It's a very accessible process, as many of us who have spent time in committee rooms will tell you. 5 calls on an issue to a member will move them. And the challenge to us is get off our duff and make those calls and show up in committee. And it's very accessible. It's very user-friendly. Now you can watch committee hearings remotely. I've not done that, but Tom, do you take questions remotely? No. But you know enough to write after a hearing and express your opinion. And you don't have to travel, assuming you have internet, which some of us do and some of us don't. Another long-standing problem, but so that's my response.
Thank you, Bill.
Arnold. Thank you.
I think the reason that we were able to successfully get that public health emergency declared was because there was an uprising of people across the country, and there was an organized effort to push for that at the State House and with the governor. And that is what we need to be doing now, is getting organized. And because our legislators are so accessible to us and we're such a small state, that being organized and applying pressure and giving clear direction about what we want to see them do is going to have an impact if they hear it from enough people. And then there is an important role to play in showing up to the State House, having rallies in front of the State House. The reason Migrant Justice's campaign was so successful last year to add immigration status and citizenship to our legally protected categories was because they had crowds of people in the room on like organized days, like pushing for this actively. So I think it needs to happen from grassroots organizing, and then, being really pointedly clear with legislative leaders, first of all, that we're willing to pay a little bit more in taxes to be able to execute these policies, because they're not going to happen for free. And I think that's one of the biggest issues that legislators are grappling with, is that the message they're getting from taxpayers is, I don't want to pay any more taxes. I can't afford any more taxes. So where's the revenue going to be to pick up the slack from the federal government if no one's willing to pony up the money for it? So that's like a different tax policy that needs to be happening. And then there's also putting your dollars, to the extent you have any, into the coffers of the organizations that are providing the service and the advocacy. Vermont Legal Aid can't rely on federal dollars to do its anti-discrimination work for forever. VAP, the Vermont Asylum Assistance Project, has been able to grow exponentially because of private donations and because of concerted effort to raise awareness and raise funds. And that work really needs to be happening actively all the time and I think just, a few months of concerted, organized effort would have a huge impact on how things end up at the end of the legislative session that's coming up. But right now, legislators also need very clear proposals, like, tell us what you want us to do. What do you think is needed? And then get bodies in the room to talk about that and how it would play out, and then come up with some revenue streams to actually be able to implement it. And those are really important conversations. And the more citizens, informed activists and organizers and advocates who are talking about this at the State House with their elected officials, the more chance we have of moving that needle continuously.
Rachel, do you want to add to that?
I'm going to approach this from a different direction. So from the local level up. And Vermont really has the opportunity, because it's relatively undeveloped, to address systemic racism through housing. What I mean by that is, as a white person, I carry unconscious implicit bias, right? And no matter how much training I go to, I still carry that around. Why is that? Because I grew up in a segregated world, and because I absorbed the messages of this systemic racist society. How do we change that? You change that by kids growing up in integrated settings. How do you get that? You have to have housing that people can afford to live in, And because of systemic racism, there's a high correlation between being Black or brown and being low income. So the only way to really address this in this systemic racism from a systemic perspective, not the only way, one way, is in Vermont, in every single town, to have affordable housing. And I mean that by that, because of housing is affordable, some housing is affordable to everyone, right? But below market housing. And that can also include things like condos that aren't subsidized housing. They're just lower cost than your single family home with 5 acres. So things like zoning reforms that allow for smaller lot sizes, more dense development that create wastewater systems so that you can have that higher denser housing, and then building that affordable housing. First of all, just making it possible through zoning to build that housing, and then pursuing funding to build that housing or developers to build that housing in every town means that kids will start growing up in a society that reflects the broader society. And I will also say that this is something that is really important for white kids, because when they leave lily white Vermont and go out in the rest of the world, it isn't like that. And it's going to be less and less and less like that. And if they have no experience of an integrated environment, they're going to be lost, and they're going to be less proficient and less effective in the world. And everybody here and everybody in Vermont can have an impact on that by talking at their local town about how important this is.
Thank you. Thank you, Rachel. Let's open it up to questions that you may have.
Hi, I feel like a lot of the things that are happening federally are already breaking a lot of constitutional law, and I think the states should band together along the attorney generals with class action suits to cover broad barriers where we are not getting funding, which we need to have funding, and it's already, I think the laws are already there, but we need protection, and we can't have just people being locked up that aren't felonies. We need bench warrants to be arresting people. We can't have people running around. We should be defending against all of this stuff, and it needs to happen also at very high levels. And I think the states need to band together, because we don't have enough money in Vermont just to tackle this one. But I think the attorney generals, if they band together as states, can work together to try to attack some of this stuff, because this is all unconstitutional, in my opinion.
I just want to say that actually has happened. There are a lot of those kind of lawsuits, and what's happening is that states and other people are winning in the district courts and even the appellate courts, and then losing in the Supreme Court. So there's only so much the law can do.
But we got to take the act, and I think the support is there. I think we have more of us than them.
You mentioned there has been some sort of coalition among states to bring grievances against the Trump administration. Do you have any idea as to how successful, how impactful that is? So,
generally, they're very successful. I think in the first Trump administration, the Vermont was involved with somewhere around 60 lawsuits against the Trump administration and won 59 of them. We will have tomorrow at the lunch panel, we will hear from Julio Thompson, who is heavily involved in all of those lawsuits at the Attorney General's office through the Civil Rights Unit. I am personally very proud of our Attorney General and the effort that they have taken to assist with the litigation that's being primarily handled by a lot of the bigger states that do have, teams larger than our entire Attorney General's office to work on a single case. But I do think that in general, they've been successful. It's just now with what the status of the Supreme Court is, that as they get appealed, we could see victories go away. But we haven't lost all of them, and we'll keep going with them. I know that. And I think one thing that's important for folks to know is that the Attorney General's office needs to know what's going on that you believe is unlawful. They they don't know unless we tell them. And they are very welcoming of Vermonters sharing like, oh, our funding got cut. You know, that is the information, that's the data that they need to know that we have standing to sue in some of these cases.
Other questions? No, I'm sorry.
Let me add that Trump won. The court then isn't the court now. Trump put 3 justices on. They're all young. They're all on the reactionary side of the coin. I mean, the administration's pushing this notion that equal protection means equal protection for cisgendered, white, able-bodied persons. And they're attacking, yeah, they're attacking, I mean, it just flips the notion of equal protection on its head, and it's bubbling to the surface. You know, that one really scares me. Sorry.
I just need to weigh in a little bit more. What is and is not constitutional is dependent on how many justices decide in favor of a certain thing. So if there's 5 justices that say something's unconstitutional, bam, suddenly it's unconstitutional. They haven't always gotten it right over history, right? We know that there were laws that they upheld that were later found to be unconstitutional, especially those related to slavery and segregation. And it is about continuing to push because the Supreme Court doesn't get it right. And, you know, we need to push against that, those wrong decisions and keep fighting until they do get it right.
Thank you. Other questions? One more question. Yeah.
Hello. Hi, Big. I'm just curious, when you say the, state human rights commissions around the country are banding together, is that including both red and blue states?
I think that the blue states feel the most targeted for funding, that we are likely to be the first ones that the feds say, we're cutting your contract or we're going to withhold this funding. But I do see folks in red states who still are involved with the work that we're involved with because they want to see they want to see fair housing, and they do feel very concerned, and they are a part of the conversation, absolutely. But I think they feel slightly less targeted right now. That could change as the next year unfolds, and we see what their next way of messing with civil rights is.
Can I ask one more question? Slightly different, very different. So if in Vermont, if we have declared that racism is a state health emergency, how about getting the Vermont Department of Health involved?
Actually, I think the Vermont Department of Health Equity Office is doing amazing things, and they are really great. And also, like every single state agency, they are getting squeezed by this governor into having fewer and fewer people do more and more work. So it's another real concern that we see across state government, that our budgets are being squeezed way too hard to be able to meet the needs of Vermonters. But I do think that the Department of Health Equity Office has a lot of, really great resources and information out there, and they're definitely doing what they can.
Good to hear.
Yeah.
Really good to hear.
Thank you, panel. Let's give it up for the panel. You want to make some brief remarks before I close?
I can just finish up.
Okay. I have some comments I want to throw out and see just how you respond as panelists. And here they are. Freedom is not free. Anyone? Just respond. Freedom is not free.
Amen.
Well, I think about all the martyrs who suffered and died in an effort to promote equality for folks of color. I think about John Lewis. I think about Plessy Ferguson, who brought the case that the court said separate but equal is okay, stayed the law of the land for over 50 years till Brown versus Board came along with Justice Marshall arguing to the Supreme Court, separate is inherently unequal. I mean, you look at our history, yeah, freedom isn't free, and I'm not talking about war hawks. Thank you.
Yeah. We just, quick responses. Quick responses. Racial justice and democracy are antithetical to each other.
Racial injustice or racial
I'm
justice?
sorry, racial injustice and democracy.
Of course.
And our democracy was founded with racism inherently built into it. So US democracy is consistent with racial injustice.
And,
Yeah, that's right.
and
It is impossible. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
no women.
And right.
No women, you have to be a landed white person to have any voice.
With property.
Yeah,
With
yeah,
land.
And a peanut.
yeah. When Jefferson said all men are created equal, he meant all men. Yeah, all
Who
white
own
men.
property.
White cis men.
Yeah.
All white men who own real property.
One more comment, one more statement. It is impossible to be courageous without being afraid.
Oh, I love that line. And I think it is so true. If we aren't a little bit afraid, then we aren't being brave. We're just carrying on with something that's easy. We have to be terrified to act out in a way that is courageous.
Yeah,
All the way.
Again, I think of John Lewis.
yeah,
Good
Yeah.
trouble. I mean,
yeah. Good trouble. Yeah.
yeah.
What, and we've commented on this just briefly, but let's see if you can have, if there are a few more perspectives on this particular. What must we do to rise up and challenge the autocracy that has happened on our watch? Just briefly, as
The $64 million question.
that is a $4 million question.
I think we have to just keep pushing back. We have to keep speaking out. We need to be organized. We need to be savvy in all ways we can. We have to get it at the local, state, federal level and just declare our refusal to conform to any more growing authoritarianism. And we do that by engaging actively in our democracy, by voting, by actively engaging our legislators, and by conveying very clearly that they will be out of a job if they don't stand up for us and for our community members.
Yeah, I would say be in the street, make your voice heard. I think it's time for a general strike, but that's a hard thing to pull off. I mean, if we stop serving the system in mass, it's going to have a major effect. I mean, you look at history, it's like, that's what causes change when you shut it down.
Well, and I guess I'm going to encourage everyone in this room to take a look at those raise up justice demands that have you can certainly find it on the Vermont Racial Justice Alliance website. And Mark, I'm going to have you remind us how to get to that website because it's really a grassroots effort to encourage, push, and demand that our state officials do something in light of the abdication of our government in protecting civil rights. So I'm going to encourage you to do that. And what I've also heard from the panel is that it's going to involve each town, members of each town saying to their local leaders as well as to their state representatives that we need to do something now. This Vermont, Greta Thunberg said at the World Economic Conference that our house is on fire, our world house is on fire. Well, our local communities and our state is also part of that fire, and we need to do something immediately to put out the flame. I'm going to make some closing remarks, and then I'm going to turn it over to Mark. we can't assume that that America is capable of being immune to the autocracy that we've already that we're starting to experience. I think we felt that the constitutional structure and foundation of this nation was an effort to prevent autocracies from occurring. And what I see going on today is really a reminder for me of what took place in Germany shortly before the rise of Hitler. Germany was only 10 years a democracy before Hitler came to power. And before that, that time between the abdication of Kaiser Wilhelm, and the advent of Hitler was just about 10 years. America was fueling the economy of Germany to put it back on track. And when the Depression hit, those dollars dried up. Hitler came into the vacuum and provided for a little while some economic benefits. But then with his Germany can go it alone without assistance, that ended up being Aryans against everyone else, white Germans against everyone else. Inflation increased. Hitler basically had power in the parliament, the Reichstag, and took control of the government. His party took control of the government and allowed him to do whatever he wanted. That's basically what's happening now. Trump has taken control of the House, the Senate, and certainly the executive office and the courts. If we don't respond at the ballot box and in our local communities, we're going to lose our democracy completely. We're going to lose the vote. So we have to take action, and we have to take it now. Our house is on fire. We need to get busy. Mark.
Thank you, Arthur. Clap for Arnold too, just for coming out. I appreciate you. That's my brother right there. And also one more time for the panel, all of whom I deeply respect and love. So thank you all for coming out. I got a brief video clip for you before we leave. I think we've got just a few more minutes, right? About 5 more minutes. So we did start a little bit late. So I'd like to reclaim maybe like 1 or 2 of those minutes. Oh, okay. Yeah. So here's what we'll do though is I just want to clean up something is that there is the joint legislative resolution that declared racism as a public health emergency is just that. It's just a joint legislative resolution. It's non-binding. It is R113. It's 2021. That was our resolution. And the governor's signature was not required on that. Just like the governor's signature was not required on the creation of the Office of on the constitutional amendment, because that's a general referendum. So there are some things that the governor is not necessarily involved in. I want to straighten that out. The other thing too is really where the work starts is with us, and that means in here, in our hearts. It's not before you go and do anything, do something in here, in your heart. Transformation. A lot of times it's easy to sidestep what we must do inside of ourselves to be able to come to terms with the definition and our responsibility surrounding systemic racism. And when you hear of systemic racism and you hear the legacy of slavery, don't stop hearing when you hear racism. And don't stop hearing when you hear slavery. I said systemic racism and the legacy of slavery. So there's a much broader picture that we need to look at, and please don't do anything out of guilt. Don't do anything out of fear, and don't do anything out of grief, but come make a reconciliation in your heart to start to do the work, because we can't do it with full vigor and commitment and integrity unless there's true transformation within ourselves first. And if we can't get there, just don't show up for the battle. If we can't get there, just don't show up for the battle. I got a brief video for you, but I just wanted to just step you through one other clarification. Then I want to show you a couple of civil rights laws that have been in play. We talked a little bit about the Supreme Court, but I want you to know that the Supreme Court has been conservative, and now it's a supermajority. It's been conservative for the duration of the life of this nation, with the exception of 15 years. I said the Supreme Court has been conservative for the duration of the life of this nation, with the exception of 15 years. And that was the Warren Court, just to be clear. Okay? As a result, what has been required is many civil rights acts or many civil rights laws. So you probably saw a little bit of a poll that was asking. It was kind of a trick question, but these are some of the civil rights laws that have been placed on the books throughout the arc of the history of this nation, and it goes on. It goes on and on. You are familiar with some of them, but I just wanted to make you familiar with the fact that there are many, many times that we've tried this experiment over and over again. And the United Nations has a lot to say about some of the things that we're doing or not doing as a nation. And at some point or another, we need to address the crime against humanity that was committed by this state, by this nation. And we got to do that individually, okay? Let me just see if I can find that short video, and then we're out of here. I want to thank everybody for coming. Look around and just clap for one another for coming. No, seriously, sitting through it. Come on, you can do better than that. It's not for me. This is hard work, okay? It is. This is work. I got Nicole Hannah-Jones here, and I'm just going to give you about 3 minutes of this, and then we're going to get out of here. Just some comments that she was making. In a little discussion she called a battle for the soul of the nation. Listen to this. Oh, can you help me with that?
I think that's this.
Let's try that.
What it must have been like to watch the mind as a collective memory upon which power thrives.
Here we go.
I used to contemplate what it must have been like to watch democracy born and then watch democracy die, to watch industry and universities and lawmakers capitulate as they believed that if they sacrificed the most marginal, their own freedom would be preserved. I don't need to contemplate that history now to understand it, because I'm living it. I am a witness to it. I am a part of it, as we all are. And this is what makes history, accurate history, so dangerous in an autocratic society. I hope it bothers you a bit in your stomach to hear me now describing the United States as an autocratic society. I hope you take it as a warning. Because history and truth-telling about our past is an inoculation. Autocrats rise based on lies and distrust and a sense that they are the rightful leaders and only certain people should hold power. Understanding history means we understand what our societies are capable of, because we live in denial. We believe we are good people from a good country and a just society. And so that blinds us to how even good people and just societies can allow horrific things to be done in their name. And so if we don't understand history and therefore don't understand what we're capable of, we are left unprepared to fight. Because we have failed to learn our history, or indeed failed to learn from it, instead of standing for the rights our forefathers and foremothers fought for, the United States right now is a nation awash in cowardice. Not just from the people we believe to be our adversaries, but most devastatingly, from people we believed to be our allies. We have witnessed capitulation, justification, an abandonment of the most vulnerable in society, a refusal to stand up for multiculturalism amidst the greatest attack on civil rights in a century, an acceptance of lawlessness in a society that said what made us superior was that we were a nation of laws. In America, we are witnessing a collective turning of our backs as we cast blame on those who sought to make our society more fair, who are trying to grapple with its history and injustices, even if sometimes that effort was messy and imperfect.
I'm gonna. I'm going to encourage you just to continue to fight the fight. I want to remind you that the fight starts in you. I want to thank you for coming out and for being a part of this very, very important conversation. I want to thank the Human Rights Commission for all of the work that they're doing in this amazing summit, and just all of the, I think there's like 14 other panels or something like that that's going on. This 15 ring circus that's happening all at the same time. It is nothing short of impossible that they're doing it. So make sure you stop and greet somebody from who's either a volunteer or one of the members of the commission. Exchange some contact information with some of the folks who are around you. This is where it starts. Really, it really is. I'm not just saying this. It really starts here. You can make a difference. Get to know somebody. Get to know somebody in the room before you leave. Create some allyships and create some partnerships in the work that we're doing. This is very, very difficult work, but we got to do it together. Thank you all. Have a great afternoon.